Verstappen was crowned 2022 F1 World Champion in confusing circumstances on a day where the FIA ended up with egg on their face more than once. Coming up on the Japanese Grand Prix-Cap, I give my opinion on the FIA's latest debacle, Esteban Ocon stars as Alpine shine in the wet, Sebastian Vettel shows he is still a class act, and there's the usual race and driver ratings. It's mics on, and away we go. Well, welcome back everybody to the 5 Red Lights F1 podcast. This is the Grand Prix cap for the Japanese Grand Prix, well, whatever Japanese Grand Prix we did manage to have after a very long delay. Again, second weekend in a row we've had a race be delayed because of rain. Lots to dive into. Thanks for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on a podcast platform as you go to work or go about your day, I really do appreciate it. The support this season has been fantastic, and there's still another 4 rounds to go. So lots to dive into, and let's get started. Let's get the fluff out of the way and get into the FIA mess, because it's another one, isn't it? It's a meme now. It's just you're waiting to use the rap guy. I forget his name. Another one. Here we go. So tractors, red flags, and Pierre Gasly is what I've got on my notes. And we've been here before, and we've had the worst possible outcome. And it happened at Suzuka as well. Of course, Jules Bianchi did pass away a few months later, but it was because of the injury suffered at the Japanese Grand Prix in 2014. And we had a near miss in Turkey in 2020 when Michael Masi was the race director. And the FIA blamed the clerk of the course, telling him that the area was clear where Latifi had beached his Williams on that afternoon in qualifying. But this one was wholly unacceptable, completely avoidable, and just downright astonishing. But let's get something straight here to begin with. The FIA are totally at fault, but they're not completely 100% to blame. Pierre Gasly has a little bit of responsibility to take in this, and I'll explain why. When these Formula One drivers commit, or any racing driver commits to go racing on a racing circuit, it is their responsibility to drive in an appropriate manner, conduct themselves in a way that does not endanger other drivers. And we've seen it before, 5-second time penalties handed out for not rejoining the track safely. And most famously, in the case of Sebastian Vettel at the Canadian Grand Prix in 2019, whether you feel he did or did not rejoin the track safely or unsafely, he was slapped with a 5-second penalty. You simply cannot endanger another competitor. And it's the same in football. You can get a straight red card for endangering an opponent, and that's the end of story. If you've endangered an opponent with a high boot or a little bit of dangerous driving, then you deserve to be punished. So Gasly's not wholly innocent, but the FIA certainly botched this recovery of Carlos Sainz's Ferrari by allowing a vehicle to enter the track in any circumstance when the track was wet, when it was dark. I mean, we know how dark it can get in Suzuka. You see the pictures post-race of Max celebrating his World Championship. It got dark pretty quickly by the end of the race. So it's a worrying situation to find ourselves in again, that the FIA seem to be unable to... It's tricky because they've got a lot of responsibility, and it's very difficult to get it 100% right all the time. And for the most part, they've been okay this season. It's not been the complete circus act that it has been in years gone by since the awful passing of Charlie Whiting. And of course, Charlie himself wasn't perfect every time, but he had years and years and years of experience and credit in the bank with drivers, and there was a communication there. We saw the drivers' briefings on YouTube, and you could see the way that they had a rapport, and that's important. But that takes time. Now, of course, Gasly has to take responsibility, but end of story, goodbye, the end. Recovery vehicles should not be on track until at least every car has passed. They have so much GPS available to them, the FIA. It's very easy to see where all the cars are. Don't let a tractor on the track until everyone's passed and they're under safety car conditions, because the safety car can then slow down and they can warn them. If you watch Formula E, they have the race director comes over the TV broadcast. He says, "Attention all teams, a safety car in 3, 2, 1, or full course yellow, or whatever." And it's heard by the fans, it's heard by the teams, and that information can then be relayed to the drivers very quickly. There is no excuse for that. You've got the lights, you've got the panels. The tractor wasn't particularly visible because it was dark and the colours aren't very bright. And then you see the images from on board Carlos Sainz's Ferrari, which was being recovered. You've got a marshal at the front of it. And I know Gasly's probably slowed down a little bit, but the way he zooms past, and this is why he needs to take responsibility, and he's not completely innocent, but he's not completely to blame at all either. It is the FIA's fault that this has happened. The marshal is put in horrific danger. That is absolutely incredible. And of course we've seen marshals suffer injuries at this same circuit back in 1994. Martin Brundle spun off at the Dunlop curve, hit a marshal and broke the marshal's leg. So it's just a terrible situation to have found ourselves in. And what really sort of caps it all is the announcement of a full investigation that cites driver feedback. Yeah, driver feedback. I mean, it's ridiculous. An inquiry is the minimum the FIA have to insist on, regardless of what the drivers have said. Even if the drivers said, yeah, okay, we saw it, we knew it was there, we kind of expected it to be, that doesn't make it right. That doesn't mean, oh yeah, we've got away with it, let's just carry on. Hang on, we just need to make sure we're still doing everything correct. So I feel the FIA are too reactive to situations. They don't preempt situations. We could have had an hour of racing in wet conditions if we'd moved the race an hour early, but they didn't. They look at these weather forecasts and you've got to expect them. You've got to expect the worst. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. And the FIA don't seem to be holding themselves to the highest possible standards, because you're letting all of this happen, and it's a bit of a circus, really. It just looks ridiculous. And it's just evident through poor decision making, lack of communication. They could have delivered the red flag earlier, and that's if you know you're going to have to put a tractor on the track in those conditions, don't leave it to chance that a car's going to slow down, because these drivers, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, because they have to. It's a competitive sport. There's no room for a gentleman's agreement about not overtaking in the final sector in qualifying. If you want track position and someone's going slowly ahead of you, take it. That's what I would do. And the inconsistencies in stewarding, policing on and off track events, it's wobbling again. And the FIA needs to build a stronger house, but until they're held accountable by someone higher than themselves, or an independent regulator of some description, someone that they report to, then they're going to be marking their own homework, and they'll double down on everything, and we'll end up with these sorts of situations where they try to pin the blame on the drivers. It's madness, really. And that wasn't even the end of the FIA's sort of chaos. And we were all led to believe that because the race was going to be timed out, it wouldn't reach 75% distance. And I don't remember it being reported, but we've always worked to the 75% is maximum points, is full points sort of rule. And no one really knew that had been taken away. That wasn't in the regs this year. So now we have this absolutely baffling situation where everyone thinks a certain amount of points have been allocated for a race that's gone 50% of distance but not reached 75 to allocate full points. And then all of a sudden, full points are awarded, and no one knew. The most crazy thing about this, and the first two crazy things about this. One is it's actually in the regulations, and the FIA were right to do this. This was by the wording of the rules. But second of all, you've got the most renowned journalists like Andrew Benson for the BBC, Chris Medland. He's very big on Twitter. He gets a lot of the information out very, very quickly to us. The guys at the race, so Glenn Freeman, Ed Straw, Mark Hughes, Scott Mitchell-Marm. You've got, who else was there? Luke Smith from Autosport. It's just this gallery of elite journalists, and they didn't know either. So how is a new fan who's only just joined the F1 family in terms of watching, they don't read the regulations? I mean, I don't. I've been watching the sport almost 30 years, and I don't want to read the regulations. They're boring and complicated, and they make you want to tear your hair out. But even Crofty and Sky, they didn't realise. It's just a silly situation to have that not clarified. And when you read the regulation, it is correct, but it doesn't explicitly state like the situation. It talks about a race not being able to resume, but it doesn't actually calculate for a race that has run but not reached 75%. So then these columns, where do they factor in? Are they just obsolete? You have to assume so, but in like a contract, in these sort of regulations, there can't be room for ambiguity, and this really needs to be tidied up. It just smacks of the FIA half-arsing things again, and they just make themselves look silly and incompetent. And we want an FIA that is strong and is guiding and is capable of saying this is right, this is wrong, and almost dictating to teams and drivers the way that these events should be run. And frankly, the FIA, if they were to get some cojones, then we may risk losing a few teams, but that's fine. Ferrari won't walk away because it's too big to their brand. If Red Bull decide it's not for them, fine. If Mercedes decide they don't want it in anymore, no problem. Renault/Alpine, they're doing a hokey cokey. They're in and out all the time, as are Honda. But you've got Andretti, who want to come and join. Porsche have been interested. Audi are joining. If Andretti come, what about Penske from the States? Bring that IndyCar rivalry to Formula One. Then everyone in the States would get on board. It would be worth having 3 races in America. You would possibly get other manufacturers, other privateers, because of the way it's now structured in terms of the cost cap, and it's more financially viable. But no, the FIA are flimsy, and that's a bit of a turn-off. When things are flimsy, you don't really want to engage with that. So when we did eventually get racing for proper, because of course we had the start and Leclerc almost snuck up the inside, but Verstappen pulled a mightily brave move on the outside of turn 1. We had the lap 1 chaos, then we had the break. When we eventually got racing again, it was in some ways a bit underwhelming, but then there were a few fights that were really interesting. We saw Esteban Ocon and Lewis Hamilton, a battle we've not really seen very often, and usually it's been Hamilton breezing past with the DRS or with a car advantage, of course, in the last few years. But Esteban really held his own, and he made the absolute most of the fact that the Alpine is very good in a straight line. He clearly didn't have the cornering performance of the Mercedes, but the Alpine has always been quick in a straight line this season, and the W13 has not. But he did enough to keep Lewis at bay. No drama. There was no sudden movements. It was a calm and assured drive of a man who knows where his future is, who's confident in his abilities now, having, of course, won a Grand Prix. So he knows he can mix it with the best. So that's promising. If Alpine get their act together, I know Ocon lacks that little bit of final bit of speed compared to a Fernando Alonso, but a performance like this shows that he is capable of maybe winning more races if Alpine deliver the car, and if they have, a car, say take the Mercedes 2014 sort of vibes, perhaps Ocon can challenge for a world championship. But he actually outperformed Fernando over this weekend, which was surprising because Alonso had looked quick in practice, and then bam, there's Ocon P5 on the grid. Alpine generally at the front of the midfield. Alonso always does well in the wet conditions, and his battle to the end with Sebastian Vettel, which we've only seen from fans filming it on the side of the track. It looked absolutely enthralling, and it shows just those two are still class acts. Alpine are losing something huge. I know they've signed Pierre Gasly, but he's not Fernando Alonso. Love him or hate him. Of course, Sebastian Vettel is leaving. Why is he leaving? He's still got it. You give this guy a decent car and he can produce. He might not be capable of putting together a championship title bid anymore, or he might win the odd race, if Aston Martin or whichever team he ends up in are competitive enough, but he can still do a very, very good midfield job. And Aston Martin, they need to make sure that their car is usable next year for Fernando, otherwise we're going to get more interesting team radio messages. So I just wanted to highlight those three because they really stood out for me in the racing once we restarted. But of course, Max Verstappen disappeared at the front, and we had the battle between Leclerc and Perez. Perez eventually forcing the mistake on the final lap, which was crucial because that ended up in a 5-second time penalty. I mean, can't really debate that, but the procedure is what miffs me a bit. The fact that that was done in about 5 minutes, and last week we had to wait 2 hours for Perez to be investigated after the race. So it does just create a narrative which is concerning. But still, focusing back on Esteban, Fernando and Sebastian, 3 excellent drives. Seb taking advantage of that early stop for intermediates to vault up the order. Fernando coming back through, having made a second stop. And Esteban fending off the 7 times world champion Lewis Hamilton. 3 excellent drives for 3 different reasons. Brilliant stuff. That's what we tune in to see. That's where we see these drivers really come to the fore. Alright, so driver ratings time. Let's begin with the 2022 world champion. I know I haven't spoken about him too much yet, but there was an awful lot else going on, to be honest. And the way that the title was won was really underwhelming. I feel sorry for Max because his 2 titles, right? He's put together 2 fantastic championship winning seasons, but last year is clouded by the Abu Dhabi controversy, and this year he crossed the line out of sight of the TV cameras. They missed him because they were too busy watching Perez and Leclerc. And it's an absolute given that the race is seen being won. If you've been watching long enough, you'll remember Imola 2005, where ITV, because they had advert breaks, and there's a Bring Back V10 story about this, where Ted Kravitz is on with Mark Hughes and Glenn Freeman. And basically, ITV were committed to a certain number of advert breaks, but because the race was so exciting between Schumacher and Alonso, they didn't want to take it, and they had to take it with 3 laps to go, so they rejoined on the final lap. So we almost missed the race being won. But in this case, we did. Max took the checkered flag on the timing tower on the left-hand side of the TV screen before the cameras picked him up. And then also the fact that he didn't realise he was champion, because obviously he wouldn't have known because of the time penalty, but no one realised full points were being awarded. I think if they'd known full points were being awarded, he would have gone for the fastest lap. I think everyone assumed, not quite half point, not quite full points would be awarded. So Max would have gone and taken the fastest lap, and then if everyone had known, it would have been, well, Leclerc's got to do a fast lap, but he hasn't got the tyres, so Max is going to be world champion. But still, let's rate some drivers. Beautiful drive from Max Verstappen, starting first, finishing first. Rate him as a 4 because, well, we've come to expect this from Max. And once he'd pulled away from Leclerc, he didn't need to do too much else. It was a very brave move around the outside in turn 1, because had he lost track position, that might have made things a bit more difficult being in the spray. His teammate Sergio Perez qualified 4th and finished 2nd. Got a rating of a 3.5. Did enough to close the gap on the Inters to Charles, and did enough to force the error to make it a Red Bull 1-2, their 5th of the season. Charles Leclerc started 2nd, momentarily was 1st, but ended up 3rd after his time penalty, a 2.5, because he tore through the tyres. And I don't know how much of that was him and how much of it was the car, but he just lacked pace on the Inters after they'd stopped. Real shame for Leclerc, and then obviously that last corner error. But that was a consequence of the pressure Perez was putting on, and the tyres were pretty much spent by that point. Carlos Sainz started 3rd but crashed out on the opening lap, so I rate him as a 2. Lewis Hamilton of Mercedes started 6th, finished 5th, a rating of a 3 because he did the best he could, I think, with the parachute that is the W13 on the straights. And you could see through Spoon, he was positioning the car beautifully, and you could really see just where, drivers like Lewis and Max and other wet weather specialists, Seb, Fernando, where they just excel. They're able to find the grip. They know that it's going to be there, and they position their car on the outside. They get that great run, and if Lewis was in any other car, he would have gone past. But he was in the Mercedes W13, which is like running with a parachute attached to your back. Good luck getting past the Alpine with that. His teammate George Russell started 8th, finished where he started in 8th, rating of 2.5. He did make 2 very nice overtakes. He was a bit self-indulgent on the radio, but when you pull a nice move like that, why not? Why not? But yeah, a disappointing weekend for George. He was off the pace of Lewis. He's not out-qualified Lewis since before the summer break, where of course he took pole position for the Hungarian Grand Prix, and it's been 5 in a row for Lewis since then. A tricky day at McLaren. They both finished where they started. So Lando started 10th, Daniel Ricciardo started 11th. They both get a rating of 2. They picked up a point, but they have lost 4th place to Alpine. And talking of Alpine, Esteban Ocon qualified a magnificent 5th, and he finished 4th because obviously Sainz dropped out on the first lap. I'm going to rate his performance as a 4.5 because while he had more straight line speed than Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, the Alpine had enough grunt down the straight to keep him ahead, and he positioned his car very well, didn't get flustered, didn't make a mistake. An excellent defensive drive from Ocon. Fernando Alonso finished where he started, missed out by 11 thousandths of a second on a P6, crossing the line side by side with Sebastian Vettel. A brilliant bit of action on the final corner. Classic F1 stuff. That was fantastic. A rating of 3.5 for Fernando. It was another pointless weekend for Alfa Romeo. Valtteri Bottas finishing 15th, having started 12th. Zhou Guanyu, he picked up the fastest lap but doesn't get the bonus point because he wasn't in the top 10. He finished 16th, having qualified 14th. They both get a 2. Fairly anonymous races. Zhou was pointing the wrong way at the hairpin on lap 1, but obviously continued. Aston Martin, I'm very glad that my prediction came true with tipping them for points this weekend. So successive 6th place finishes for the team. One last weekend in Singapore with Lance, and this time around with Sebastian Vettel. Seb got himself into Q3 with a magnificent qualifying. Qualified 9th, finished 6th, and he's the star driver, a rating of 5. He read the conditions. He got onto the Inters immediately. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain, but you still got to go out and make it work. And he did. He did great because he managed to keep the tyres alive, hung on for that 6th place, beat Alonso to the line by the barest of margins. Fabulous stuff. Fabulous, fabulous. Lance, P18 on the grid, a rocket ship start. That was a fantastic start. He found the only bit of track that was suitable for intermediates at that point of the race and just took off. Almost crashed when he hit the wet stuff again, but kept it all going forward. He was one of those who stopped again for fresh inters and came back through the order. So, decent enough drive from Lance. He's very good in the wet, and he showed it. So a rating of 3 for him. Difficult day for Haas. No points again for the American team. Kevin Magnussen, 17th on the grid, finished 14th, rating 2. Mick Schumacher crashed after the checkered flag in practice 1. That was worrying. He's under pressure for his seat, and this result won't have gone down in helping him. He started 15th, finished 18th. The team took a risk. They left him out on the full wets, hoping for some sort of safety car to be able to bring him in for a cheap stop onto Inters. But it didn't work out like that. In fact, everyone who took the restart finished the race. The only 2 retirements came on lap 1, and that was Sainz and Albon. So it was some pretty good driving, actually, from everybody. Really, really good stuff. I don't remember anyone going off track, except Charles Leclerc, of course, on the final lap. But his tyres were cooked. A rating of 2.5 for Mick Schumacher on a weekend where he really needed to perform. He did outqualify Kevin Magnussen, but it didn't quite go to plan for him. And Pierre Gasly at AlphaTauri, he'll probably just be thankful that he got to the end of the race after driving past the tractor on lap 2 of the race. He started from the pit lane, had a really wretched qualifying. He finished 17th, a dismal weekend for Pierre. A rating of 2. Yuki Tsunoda, his home race, finished where he started in 13th, rating of 2 as well. Alex Albon at Williams, he didn't finish, having started 16th, rating of 2 as well. But Nicholas Latifi, from 19th on the grid, finished P9. 4.5 for Nicky Latifi. Again, showing that, much like his Canadian counterpart Lance Stroll, he's very good in the wet. He showed it at Silverstone in the wet qualifying in the top 10 that day. And here he is, getting himself P9, 2 points. And he goes from 22nd in a 20-car championship to the lofty heights of 20th. Alright, to round off this show, before I wrap it up, it is race rating time. Of course, remember to leave your race rating in the comments down below if you so wish. Or you can rate the drivers as well. You can do it all. You can reply to anything that I've said in there, and we can have a nice little chat about it. Let's rate the race. I'm going to give it a 5. Was it worth getting up before 6 a.m. on a Sunday for? No. Because I had to sit there and wait 2 hours for meaningful action. And that's fine. If the conditions aren't right, then fine. Not a problem. But also there was a bit of a spectre hanging over the race. You know, this could have been a really fun afternoon or morning, you know, depending on where you were watching it from. But instead we got frustration, we got confusion, and ultimately confusion, and another unsatisfying conclusion to a world championship, because no one really knew that Max had won it, which, as I said before, is a shame, because you know you want to be able to celebrate those moments if you're a Max fan, but you know it's the FIA, you know. But the racing action we did get, which was mostly between Lewis and Esteban and then Perez and Leclerc, that was great. We did miss the race and subsequent championship being won, as I mentioned earlier, and that's fairly outrageous. Maybe the race was expected to go one more lap, and that caught out the TV director. But yeah, it's just another confusing element of this race. We were lucky to escape the recovery vehicle situation, and that hung over the race like a spectre. The ghost of Jules Bianchi maybe just guiding everyone through and making sure the same fate did not befall anybody else. And as always, I asked the guys and girls over at the Grid Talk podcast to rate the race. So hosts Ruby Price and Louis Edwards gave the race a 5, as did Carl King from the Monkey Seat podcast. Owen Medford scored the race at a 4, while Jared Partridge gave it only 2. Everything F1's Tom Downey offered up a 6, while Hit the Apex host Jawad Yaqub rated the race 3 out of 10. Of course, leave your rating in the comments below. So the checkered flag is now waving on another show. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope you enjoyed it. You can find my written work on f1chronicle.com and insidef2.com, as well as more on this channel, like my short videos reacting to breaking news, general opinion. I did one about the cost cap breach of Red Bull, alleged cost cap breach. Although this has come out on a Tuesday, so it's being recorded Monday. In about half an hour, we might find out what the punishment is, if there's going to be a punishment. So hold tight for that. I will do my best to get some F1 Manager live streams going on YouTube with my Alpine save. You can see the first 2 full streams which were done on Twitch, but it's going to move over to YouTube now, as I said last week, just bring everything together. But I'm just trying to figure out when to do it, so that's a bit tricky. I'm also currently working on a challenge video on the game, which will come out on the channel. So make sure you're subscribed on YouTube to catch both of those, so the live streams and this challenge video that I'm doing. And if you like what I do, please leave a review on Apple or on Spotify. If I rock the mic, leave a like, please. There is a little bit of time to digest this latest FIA debacle, and for Max Verstappen to celebrate his 2nd World Championship triumph before F1 goes stateside to Texas. I'll be back in a couple of weeks then for the American Grand Prix-Cap. Until then, enjoy any racing or anything you get up to in the intervening weekend, and I will see you when the 5 red lights go out.